A small brass key, spotted years ago by a curious landscaper, may hold a secret about James Garner's long-forgotten hideaway in the hills above Malibu. It was tucked behind a loose stone on the edge of the property wall, left there by a man who valued privacy above all else, and who, paradoxically, spent most of his life in front of the cameras. The landscaper claimed it opened the back door to a craftsman-style bungalow on the estate. An unremarkable key at first glance, but how curious it remained there, as if Garner himself had planned a quiet return one day. There was something emblematic about that key's hidden presence. It spoke to James Garner's desire for refuge, for an unspoken promise that he could come and go without the world watching. Today, that same home lies abandoned, the rosemary overgrown, its golden-hued stucco walls streaked with vines. But in those hushed, empty rooms, you can still sense the warmth and the quiet turmoil that marked the life of a man who always sought solace away from the spotlight. James Garner was born James Scott Bumgarner in Norman, Oklahoma, in 1928. He spent much of his early life drifting between places, never quite sure where he belonged. This fluid upbringing, the instability of his childhood, gave him a deep longing for security. He once confided in an interview that even as a boy he wanted a place to settle into, a real home that no one could take away. That longing would later fuel his search for the perfect hideaway. Garner found success in Hollywood, and to the public, he was the unruffled private investigator Jim Rockford, or the charming card-sharp Brett Maverick. But behind the swagger was an unassuming man with a deep hunger for personal quiet, the kind of man who might stoop to pick up a stray cat in the back alley of a film set and worry about where it would sleep that night. Before the Malibu escape and the fabled abandoned property he would eventually leave behind, Garner's first foray into real estate was a modest post-war tract home in the San Fernando Valley. It wasn't fancy. It was the kind of single-story ranch house you might pass 1,000 times without noticing. Surrounded by a lawn that turned brittle in the summer heat, that early home was never meant for grandeur. It was purely functional, close enough to the studios he needed to commute to, but far enough from the heart of Los Angeles to quiet the swirling commotion in his head. He filled it with second-hand furniture, well-worn chairs, and mismatched cabinets. He didn't much care about interior design at that stage in life. He just wanted a place where he could close the door at night and forget about the scripts, the flashing cameras, and the swirl of expectations. Yet even in that unassuming valley neighborhood, Garner's magnetic warmth drew visitors. Friends from the set of Maverick would drop by for late-night card games. He once recounted that they'd occasionally recreate scenes from the show around his rickety dining table, ironically playing with plastic chips rather than real money. The living room was painted a pale green, and Garner loved to set fresh flowers on a side table near the window, in part because they reminded him of Oklahoma meadows. In that sense, the home was a reflection of the young actor's heart, pragmatic and unpretentious, but still wanting a touch of nature's serenity. It was a starter home, a transitional cocoon that gave him a semblance of rooting before his career soared. As his fame skyrocketed in the 1960s and 1970s, Garner found himself longing for a property that would offer more seclusion. Hollywood parties were not typically his scene, though he attended them often to maintain appearances and secure relationships for new roles. But the moment he could, he'd retreat to quiet corners with a friend or slip out early. Fame to James Garner was never a comfortable garment. It was a uniform he wore out of necessity. So when the opportunity arose to purchase a secluded Malibu plot with a partial ocean view, he jumped at it. The land was expensive for the time, but Garner saw in it the promise of an oasis, a place where he could hear birdsong instead of traffic. The Malibu home that rose on that plot started as a simple architectural dream. He employed a local architect who specialized in craftsman-inspired design. Garner loved the idea of blending the interior spaces with the natural environment. In interviews, he often talked about his love for open beams and large windows that let sunlight stream in. He requested reclaimed wood for the floors, hoping the knots and grain patterns would add character and remind him of simpler times. The result was a structure that felt both grand and humble at once. The wide front porch wrapped around the living room, dotted with Adirondack chairs. Sometimes early in the morning, Garner would watch the marine layer drift in from the Pacific, sipping black coffee from a chipped mug. Visitors in those early Malibu days remarked how the actor's personality echoed throughout the house. There was a large stone fireplace in the living room where he liked to read scripts or linger with a glass of bourbon late into the night. The mantel was cluttered with souvenirs from his travels, Japanese calligraphy brushes, a small model airplane reminiscent of his service in the Korean War, and photos of his family arranged in mismatched frames. Garner was always more open among intimate friends than he was in public. Around that fireplace, jokes would be shared, confessions made. There was a story told by a fellow actor who visited once. Garner insisted everyone remove their shoes at the door, out of respect for his beloved floors, but also because he believed that a quiet, shoeless house helped people feel more at home. That's what the house was, a gentle invitation to let your guard down. Over time, the Malibu property became more than just a weekend retreat. Garner found that he would often skip events in Hollywood to stay there longer, listening to the waves in the distance, soaking up the sun in the garden. The landscaping was intentionally modest, with drought-tolerant plants, sages, succulents, rosemary, and lavender lining a rustic stone pathway. "I always loved that the place smelled like you were on a hillside in the south of France," commented one of his close friends. Even inside, the decor had a subtle nod to Mediterranean influences: warm terracotta tiles in the kitchen, soft earth-toned walls, and wrought iron light fixtures that cast delicate shadows in the evenings. While not lavishly decorated, the Malibu house carried a sense of understated elegance, as though it was an extension of Garner's own demeanor, self-assured but never flashy. When the Rockford Files became a cultural phenomenon, Garner's celebrity soared to new heights. He was recognized wherever he went. Paparazzi occasionally camped at the entrance to his property, trying to snap a picture of him relaxing or chatting with guests. He added tall hedges and upgraded the front gate to ensure more privacy, and the neighbors supported him. Everyone knew he was a friendly man, but they also knew he cherished his seclusion. Close friends say the stress of playing a TV detective for such intense, continuous stretches wore on him physically. There were days he wanted to step away from the camera entirely, yet that beloved portrayal, Jim Rockford, the relatable everyman private eye, cemented his status in American pop culture. With that success came financial security, and Garner began to look for a second property that might cater to a different facet of his personality. A few years into the Rockford Files, Garner fell in love with a ranch-style property outside Santa Barbara. This was a sprawling estate on the outskirts of wine country, partially surrounded by rolling hills and oak groves. It was rumored that the previous owner had once entertained the likes of Clark Gable and Ava Gardner in the 1950s, but the place had grown neglected over the years. Garner saw potential not in hosting glamorous soirees, but in creating a horse sanctuary. He adored animals, horses in particular, and had always imagined himself living in the countryside, far from the bustle of Los Angeles. With characteristic directness, he purchased the estate and embarked on a long renovation. He wanted stables with padded floors and wide stalls so the horses could live comfortably. He also built a stable office complete with an old oak desk where he'd sometimes do script readings, the scent of hay drifting through the window. This Santa Barbara ranch was wilder, more sprawling, and more connected to the land, whereas the Malibu home felt like a quiet seaside retreat. The ranch demanded a different energy. Garner loved to ride in the mornings. He found it meditative. The wind in his face reminded him of the open plains back in Oklahoma. If the Malibu home represented his longing for solitude, then the ranch signified a return to simpler, almost pastoral roots. The main house had broad windows that overlooked the pastures, and sometimes at dusk, deer ventured onto the property's edges. People say Garner would stand at the window, arms crossed, a faint smile on his face, watching these wild visitors silently. It was as if in those moments he bridged the gap between his old life and the new. Once a restless child, without a permanent home, now an established star with two residences that mirrored different pieces of his soul. Ironically, the busyness of maintaining two properties, plus an acting career, started to wear on him. Garner was well known in the industry for his forthrightness. He disliked studio politics and had numerous disagreements with networks over contract matters. When frustration piled up, he'd escape to the Santa Barbara ranch to clear his head. Some say the property was his thinking house, where he'd walk for hours, take notes on potential roles, or draft letters to the studio heads in which he'd protest unfair conditions. More than once, he threatened to walk away from a production, and for him, it wasn't a bluff. He believed in standing by one's principles. That ranch, with its wide open spaces, gave him the spiritual backbone to face Hollywood's relentless demands. At the same time, Malibu remained a cherished weekend spot. Over the years, the Craftsman Bungalow saw quiet gatherings, holiday celebrations, and occasional filming sessions for personal projects. He never turned it into a boisterous party house. Instead, the house was about comfort. The squeak of a screen door, the clatter of coffee cups in the morning, the hush of waves. If close friends dropped by, they might find Garner in the den, feet propped up on a small footstool, reading a biography of Winston Churchill. Perhaps ironically, in a corner of the living room hung a small plaque that read, "Home is the only place in the world where you're safe from feeling put in your place." One friend joked that if you spent too long in Malibu, you'd either fall asleep on the couch or lose yourself in conversation. But the years marched on. Garner's career had its ebbs and flows, successful films, conflicts with studios, triumphant returns to television, and a wave of adoration from fans who found in him a charismatic, reliable presence. Yet health issues crept in. The physical demands of stunts and a series of knee and back injuries started to limit him. He toyed with the idea of selling one of the properties. He wasn't sure he needed both. But every time the subject arose, he hesitated. The Santa Barbara ranch was a reminder of his freedom and love of the land, while the Malibu house was a comfortable retreat by the sea. He couldn't quite let go of either, so both remained in his possession for years. The big turning point came when Garner decided to scale back from acting, focusing more on family. His children had grown. His wife, Lois Clark, had stood by him through the roller coaster of Hollywood life. The ranch was too big to manage day to day, so they kept staff on hand to maintain the horses and the grounds. Meanwhile, the Malibu house became Garner's primary day-to-day sanctuary. He loved to shuffle around its corridors, a gentle hush in the air. He replaced worn-out furniture with new pieces that maintained a similar, unassuming style. He had a special nook for reading, next to a large window that faced the ocean. Sometimes, when a storyline or a memory from the Rockford Files amused him, You could hear him chuckle to himself. Eventually, as age caught up, Garner spent less time traveling between the two properties. The ranch was visited only sporadically. Family members remarked that the place felt stuck in time. Furniture draped with sheets, dust settling on the windowsills, the old stable office rarely touched. But he refused to sell. It was part of him. The piece that recognized that an Oklahoma boy who once slept in a shed could own land teeming with life. So it remained, quietly aging, a testament to an earlier era of Garner's persona. Then there's the matter of the so-called abandoned home. After Garner's passing in 2014, rumors circulated that his Malibu sanctuary had been left to crumble, that heirs argued over its future, and that it might sit vacant indefinitely. In truth, the reality was more nuanced. Legal complexities, emotional ties, and a sense of reluctance to alter the place where Garner spent so many peaceful days combined to postpone decisions about the property. Even so, it wasn't boarded up in the stereotypical sense. Instead, it just drifted out of daily use. The garden left unpruned, furniture collecting dust, the paint fading from the salt air. On rare occasions, a caretaker visited to ensure everything was secure, but for the most part, it stood quietly, a soulful relic of a once vibrant life. Those who managed to see inside today speak of a strange, dreamlike calm. The open-beamed ceilings still loom overhead. The fireplace, where Garner once joked, read scripts, and sipped bourbon, holds a few charred logs, seemingly from the final fire he lit there. The built-in bookshelves, a personal point of pride for a man who loved to learn, are still lined with biographies, novels, and a few battered script binders. 1 or 2 coffee mugs remain in the kitchen sink, left as if someone might come by later to wash them. The hallways are hushed, corners coated with cobwebs that dance in the filtered sunlight. The faint smell of old wood lingers. If you listen closely, you might swear you hear the echoes of Garner's easy laughter, or imagine the hush that would fall when he slipped out to the deck for a breath of ocean air. In that sense, the home becomes a metaphor for the man. Sturdy, welcoming, slightly worn around the edges, but still radiating a gentle aura of warmth. This was where he found peace and, in his own words, laid down the weight of the world. The sense of calm comes not from emptiness, but from an abiding presence, as though the property itself has never quite let him go. Even in its deserted state, it stands as a testament to Garner's ability to find refuge from Hollywood's demands. One curious detail is the rumored hidden nook off the master bedroom closet. According to an acquaintance who worked on the remodel in the early 1980s, Garner requested a small soundproof chamber accessible only through a hinged panel. The reason remains unclear. Some believe it was used for meditative reading or dictation of script notes. Others claim he used it as a private retreat for naps, free from the hum of electricity or the temptation of a ringing phone. This rumor persisted for years, and only close friends knew its location. To date, few have confirmed its actual existence, yet the notion of Garner having a secret room to slip away into underscores his deep desire for personal space. In a life so public, every inch of solitude was precious. Another story whispered among neighbors involved an impromptu jam session that took place in Garner's living room one evening, sometime in the mid-1970s. The participants reportedly included country singer Willie Nelson and actor Steve McQueen, both of whom Garner considered friends. They had been at a nearby charitable event and ended up at Garner's home, guitars in hand, playing and singing into the night. The caretaker's wife at the time, who lived on the property in a small guest house, said she heard the music drifting through the windows until near dawn. Later, she found empty beer bottles lined up on the porch rail. Garner never boasted about these gatherings. They were personal memories, as ephemeral as the last chord of a song. The Santa Barbara Ranch tells another side of his story. Even though it too has fallen into a quiet state, the equestrian facilities remain sturdy and the paddocks still have sturdy fences. In some ways, the ranch was less an escape from Hollywood and more a reclaiming of his roots. He prided himself on caring for the horses personally when he was able. On weekends, he'd sometimes show up unannounced, greet each horse, and slip them apples. A longtime ranch hand recounted how Garner would lean against a fence post and just watch the animals graze, saying almost nothing. It was a contemplative ritual, as if gleaning lessons in patience from the gentle creatures. Now, with Garner gone, the ranch stands as a silent caretaker of those memories, a piece of him still anchored to the land he loved. The differences between Malibu and Santa Barbara parallel Garner's own internal contrasts. On the one hand, he was Jim Rockford, the quick-witted private eye who navigated danger and outsmarted criminals. On the other, he was a quiet soul drawn to the hush of rural fields, content to let the day pass in peaceful reflection. Malibu's ocean breezes fit the side of him that longed for open horizons and a gentle hush, while Santa Barbara's rolling hills satisfied his longing for the pastoral calm he knew in his youth. Each home provided a sanctuary for different emotional seasons of his life. Malibu was where he recovered from the grind of film sets, strolled barefoot on hardwood floors, and let the Pacific's presence wash away any lingering stress. Santa Barbara was where he communed with nature and reacquainted himself with the boy who once roamed Oklahoma farmland. Two properties, two facets of a man who was far more nuanced than the casual observer might guess. Over the years, rumors persisted about ghosts or eerie presences in the Malibu bungalow, mostly fueled by caretakers who swore they heard footsteps in empty corridors or faint laughter at night. Some said Garner's friends deliberately concocted these tales to ward off trespassers. Others believed that an earlier resident, perhaps a reclusive poet, left behind an aura of restless energy. When asked about these spectral stories, Garner would laugh them off, but he admitted he liked the idea of sharing the house with friendly spirits. "As long as they don't rearrange my furniture, they're welcome," he once joked. That sense of humor was part of his charm. He found a way to diffuse tension, whether it arose from paparazzi or poltergeists. As for the final years, Garner wrestled with health complications that restricted how often he could roam between his two cherished homes. Family members recall that toward the end, he spoke often of the Malibu porch, of the smell of lavender in the Santa Barbara ranch fields, and how one day he'd like to go back and spend a week at each, just soaking up their individual beauty. It was not meant to be. Yet even after his passing, the emotional resonance of these properties lingers. Some fans make pilgrimages, trying to catch a glimpse through the gates, imagining they might see that iconic grin or hear a snippet of dialogue from the Rockford Files. The gates remain locked, the driveways empty, but the memory remains vivid. James Garner's abandoned home still stands, waiting for fate or time to decide its future. Perhaps it will be renovated by a fan who recognizes its quiet magic, or maybe it will remain in that suspended state, a living monument to a man who cherished privacy in a world ravenous for glimpses of him. Whatever its destiny, the memory of him remains in the hush of its halls, in the glow of late afternoon light that once illuminated his reading chair. And as for that key, whether lost or found, it symbolizes the eternal truth that home is not merely a roof over our heads. It's a choice to nurture a safe place for the heart, a place where, if only for a moment, the world outside fades, leaving us with our thoughts, our dreams, and the faint promise of peace.